Coming up on this episode, we're going to discuss ministry to persons who experience same-sex attraction as we speak with Father Luke Millett, who's been involved with bringing the Courage and EnCourage apostolates to the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. Welcome to Around the Archdiocese.
Sharing information, insights, and stories about our Catholic faith from across the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston, you're listening to Around the Archdiocese. Here's your host, Sean O'Driscoll.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Several months ago, the Archdiocese welcomed the Courage and EnCourage apostolates to our list of ministries. The Courage apostolate is the Church's invitation to people who experience same-sex attractions who desire to live in accord with the gospel call to chastity. It's a confidential support group led by a priest chaplain, which accompanies men and women along the road to integration, freedom, and discipleship. United by friendship with Christ and one another, Courage members strive for chastity and holiness, meeting regularly for prayer and mutual support. The EnCourage ministry welcomes parents, spouses, and other loved ones of people who experience same-sex attraction to meet regularly to support one another towards the goal of staying true to the teachings of the Church while maintaining strong, healthy family bonds. My guest today is Father Luke Millett, who's been involved with bringing the Courage and EnCourage apostolate to the Archdiocese. We have a frank and open discussion about what it means to minister to persons who experience same-sex attractions, what the Church's teachings are on the subject, and we even talk about the document Fiducia Supplicans, which came out a couple of months ago on the pastoral meaning of blessings. Links and information regarding the Courage and EnCourage apostolates can be found in the show notes for this episode. So, without further ado, let's start the show. When we talk about ministry to persons who experience same-sex attraction, it does bring up different, understandings of what that means and who these people are. So what exactly is the Church saying about this ministry? Who exactly are we trying to minister to here?
Well, first of all, Sean, thanks for having me here as we speak about this important topic. As you said, it's an important ministry in the Church in which we've been kind of falling behind on, to be completely honest, as well as noting, as you did, that it's a very controversial area. There's a lot of very strong opinions about this, and we see this very clearly in what just happened recently with the document put out by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith called Fiducia Supplicans, which ultimately was a document speaking about the application of pastoral blessings to people. And then within this document, within that context of what is a blessing, they talked about the possibility of applying a pastoral blessing to a same-sex couple who had approached a pastor. And so with that, there was a lot of, we'll just say, noise that happened on both sides of people who were supportive of this and wanted to take it further than what the dicastery said, and people who were not supportive of this and wanted to reject what the dicastery said completely. And right there, we see the strong issue the strong tension that exists in the heart of the Church right now. This tension between those who want to, if you will, fully bless the same-sex lifestyle and those who want to fully, if you will, condemn the same-sex lifestyle. To take a little bit of a segue, by analogy, I had a recent experience which I think can also kind of highlight this. I was recently at an interfaith meeting with Muslims, Jews, Christians, a whole bunch of different people, and sitting there amongst all these people who I didn't know and was from a completely different background tradition, it was, we'll just say, uncomfortable, to say the least. And as I was sitting there trying to struggle with what to say, what to do, how to react, how to feel, the speaker's basic message, really hit home for me. He said, all of us are sitting here staring at the differences between each of us. Instead, we need to focus on what we have in common. And by focusing on what we have in common, that gives us a point to start from this conversation and from the way we interrelate to one another. And I think by analogy, that's a really good way to start this conversation as well. to look at what do we have in common, because we want to look at the differences that separate us. We want to look and say, well, this person doesn't belong for that reason, or this person is doing that with their life. This person, we have all these reasons, all these things that keep us from wanting to interrelate or from being comfortable with one another. But what are the common grounds we can start from? And in this ministry, we have to start, first of all, from the simple point that every single person that we're dealing with, regardless of who they are, was made in the image and likeness of God. And so there is an inherent dignity that every single human being has. And that is the first place we have to start from when we're addressing these issues, is the common dignity that every single person has, and especially as Christians, the common dignity that comes from our baptism. And within this, we can really kind of start to think about, well, what do we have in common? That we have people who truly also desire to be loved and to love. Now, how they love, that's obviously where some differences come in. And so as a church, we sit in that tension that we already see that's there. We're not supposed to be on one side where all we do is just say whatever you do is okay, and yet we're not sitting on the other side saying that you don't belong. That somewhere in the midst of this we hold truth and love and tension. And that's exactly where Christ was with every issue. Every single person he met, he loved them, he sat with them, he ate supper with them, and then he invited them to conversion. And I think that's the common place we have to start from with all of this, that we sit in that tension and that discomfort, getting to know each other, forming and establishing relationships, and then from that comes the invitation to follow the truth given to us by Jesus Christ.
You mentioned fiducia supplicans, and I guess to kind of get it out of the way, we still hear, because I think it was brought up in the media, the way it was reported was the church has changed a basic teaching on sexuality. And that's really not what the document said at all. Can you kind of explain what the document said and what it didn't say?
Correct. So the document, as I mentioned, was at its heart simply an examination of blessings. What are blessings? When can they be given? And what it really said was that when someone presents themselves to a priest, the priest has the ability to give the person a blessing. They said in this context that a couple who presents themselves, who may not be living in accord with God's law, but is desiring God's grace and God's blessing, can receive if you will, a non-ritualized blessing from the priest. In other words, it is not meant to be a blessing in front of the church, in front of the community. It's not meant to be something that, if you will, supports or in any way gives some sort of indication that the church is regularizing this union, that is blessing the relationship, as much as that they are blessing the people. And what we saw, though, is that many people took this in different ways. Some people said that it's the church saying that now we recognize, if you will, same-sex civil unions. Other people saying that we are now blessing the sin that exists in those same-sex civil unions.
And I think we've heard a lot of this in our parishes in the pews. What does the document actually say about same-sex marriages, unions? What does the document say about that?
Well, in reality, it doesn't really say anything about those, because in reality, where it talks about is simply the fact that we find before us people who desire God's mercy, who may not always be in situations, who may not always be in situations that are, if you will, supported by the church. And if you will, the same-sex civil unions was just a small piece of that. In a sense, it was meant to be extended across the board. If you think about it pastorally, when you're outside as a priest and then someone walks outside the church and says, "Father, will you bless me?" we never really generally pause and stop to say, well, who are you? What do you do? And, give me your resume, tell me all the sins you ever committed, and then I will bless you. No, we say, of course, God wants to bless you. Of course, I will give you God's blessing. And this is the context in which this is set. It is a non-solemnized blessing in which someone walking outside the doors of the church asks for a blessing. And so this applies across the board, What about those people who are, if you will, heterosexual, and their marriage is not recognized in the church for some reason? This extends to those couples as well as it does to same-sex couples. In the same way that couple walking out with their 3 children who can't get a marriage recognized in the church and yet still want God's blessing and are still going to church on Sunday because they're seeking God, what the document Fiducia Supplicans says is that, yes, we can extend a blessing on that couple. That is not something that says that, oh, don't worry, your marriage is okay. No, it recognizes the reality they're in a marriage that can't be regularized by the church, and yet God still loves them, and God still wants to extend blessings to them to the extent that they're able to receive. And so I think when we put it into the overall context, that it's not just this one sliver of a population or of a situation, that it applies to all the pastoral situations a priest might encounter outside the doors of the church.
So the perennial teaching of the church on marriage has not changed.
Correct.
Cannot change.
Correct.
Is not going to change.
Correct.
Okay, we got that part out of the way. But as you said, it really kind of continues sort of this message of Pope Francis's pontificate, this message of mercy.
Correct. Yes, very much so.
All of us are loved, and all of us are offered that mercy from God if we come forward. And when someone approaches a priest, there's something in them that's seeking that, that's calling out, that wants that connection with God. And that blessing may be the first step into something greater, something more.
Correct. Yeah, this brings to mind for me St. Augustine's famous book, The Confessions. You know, if you've read the book at the beginning, St. Augustine's talking about, before I even knew to call upon you, your grace was there, giving me the desire to call upon you. In a sense, that we're at the heart of that mystery right here. We have an entire group of people who, in a sense, the church has never made a place for, to be just kind of blunt about it. And yet, if we want them to come to know God's love, we have to get them through the doors. We can't expect someone to convert and then show up and join the church. You join the church so you can convert. In a sense, we've gotten the order backwards, and we've forgotten that the first thing we have to do is invite, and we invite in love. Once we do that, then God's grace can move, and God's grace can convert and change people. And yet, if we don't invite people through the doors of the church, how will they ever know they're loved? How will they ever know they belong? And so we have to make steps, in a sense, to create a place where people belong, where they know they belong, where they know that they are desired and wanted, if we ever want them to come and know the saving power of God.
You mentioned that, we're all sinners, and we're all coming forward, seeking something, when we approach the priest, when we approach the altar, when we come to the church. But knowing that we're all sinners, I think a question that often gets misconstrued, oftentimes within Catholic conversations, is the idea of same-sex attraction. And is it a sin to experience that? Is it a sin to be gay? So I guess maybe the deeper question is, can you be gay and be Catholic?
Right. Yeah. No. And that brings us again to kind of the heart of this issue here. The church's teaching on this is very clear and very simple. Experiencing same-sex attraction is not sinful in itself. It is acting on these attractions in unhealthy and sinful ways that begets the sin. To put it back into terms that we all understand in our own lives, we all have attractions, desires that are not ordered, if you will, attractions and desires to do things that are sinful or would be sinful in excess or whatever it might be. My attraction to chocolate could lead itself to sin if I act on it too much and become gluttonous with it. And so we all have those in our lives. The simple fact that we have disordered attractions does not mean that we ourselves are bad people or that we are sinful or that we're outside God's mercy or grace. All it means is that we have a cross of something that we have to work through, a suffering, a struggle that we have to bring to God so that He can help us to carry that cross, so that through it we can come to experience His salvation.
And you use that word disorder, which I think often becomes a point of contention when we look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church,
Correct.
which describes same-sex attraction as a disorder. And I think in our common everyday parlance, we associate disorder with almost disability. And it's really meant to be, by ordered, we mean directed.
Correct. No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking this is a good time to mention this. Because, yes, in the Catechism, when you look at its teachings on same-sex attraction, it calls it a disordered affection. And that understandably causes tension and heartache in some people because they feel like they are being called disordered. In reality, when we look through the Catechism, anytime it talks about sin, anytime it mentions sin, it calls sin a disordered inclination. It doesn't matter what that sin is. It is all, in the eyes of the Catechism, disordered because, as you mentioned, it is not ordered towards God. And so anything that turns us away from God in the Catechism is seen as disordered. And yet again, that is always applied to the action, not the person. So if someone were to walk around and say that you, my friend, are disordered, no, you're misunderstanding the Catechism, you're misunderstanding the teachings of the Church. God created us and looked at us and said, it is good. The only thing that is not good is sin, that which turns us away from God. And yet the person themselves is ordered and loved by God. And so we have to make sure we keep the language correct when we use it. Otherwise, we are being offensive, truly being offensive to people.
So in order to bring about this hospitality, this welcome, this acceptance, this opportunity that we're creating for people to encounter Christ, whether it's through the church, through its ministers, or through us, the laity, the faithful, the Archdiocese has been working to bring into our diocese the Courage apostolate. And you've been working for a while now to bring that into the diocese. Can you tell us what the Courage apostolate is and what they do?
Sure, thank you. So the Courage apostolate is a approved group by the Roman Catholic Church. It's actually set up as a association for priests. And so the chaplains who are approved chaplains for Courage are, if you will, the members of this group. And then what they do is in the various dioceses where they are, they establish groups by which those who experience same-sex attraction and want to try to live out their faith have a place where they can go to discuss their faith, to discuss their struggles, and come together with like-minded people to continue on that faith journey.
I know this question's going to come up for our listeners, but is the goal to change their orientation?
No, and that's, we hear, you'll hear the term, for example, conversion therapy and things like that. That is not something the Church teaches, nor preaches, nor, if you will, even believes in. The goal is so that the individual can live their life in accord with Christ and to live out their faith. That is the goal. Yes, we have heard accounts of some people who have experienced same-sex attraction, and later on that attraction went away. But that's not always the case. Some people's attraction is on, if you will, a spectrum, and it can shift over time. Other people's attraction is fixed. And so to come in with this attitude that, all they have to do is, to use the phrases that's theirs, to pray away the gay, well, that's not a reality. I've prayed a long time, and I've got a lot of sinful tendencies that are still there despite all my prayers and all my confessions. And so again, to put it back within the context that we ourselves know, there are some struggles that we will just never get over. There are some things we can never change. You'll never be able to make me not liking going out and to the outdoors. That is part of who I am. To expect that to change is expecting something that's just not reality.
Now, I know within the Courage apostolate, the idea is to gather people together, to meet, to journey together.
Correct.
To a deeper understanding of that. And Courage itself actually has 5 goals that are stated and read at the beginning of each meeting. And I wonder if we could just kind of review some of these, because I think there's something in there for all of us. The first goal of Courage says to live chaste lives in accordance with the Roman Catholic Church's teaching on homosexuality. And when we bring up chastity, I think a lot of people think we mean abstinence, that we're just going to abstain from sexual relations, but chastity extends much broader than that. What exactly do we mean by chastity in general in the church?
Well, we have to look at two different terms to look at this. First of all, is the two terms are chastity and continence. And honestly, I always confuse and conflate the two, and a lot of us do. But one of them, is something we're all called to. So we're all called to live chaste lives according to our particular vocation. And so regardless of whether you're married, whether you're single, whatever it might be, we're all called to live chaste lives in accord with God's commandments. And so to be, kind of clear and blunt about it, is that even within a marriage, not every sexual act would be something that is, if you will, loved by God. That even within marriage, there is a calling to those gifts being exercised properly. Continence, of course, is the call to celibacy, which is the call that religious and priests and many others have. And so while they're interrelated, there's also a difference between the two. And so some people who experience same-sex attraction might have a call to celibacy in the sense that there's no way for them to exercise their sexuality in a way that is in accord with God's teaching. And so those people would be called in the same way that I am, would be called to voluntarily give up their sexual activity to God. Some people who experience same-sex attraction are actually in marriages with people of the opposite sex, and they are living out marriages, and they are experiencing, living out their sexuality in a chaste way within that marriage. And so there's a lot of different ways that this might be experienced or expressed by different people.
The second goal of courage is to dedicate one's life to Christ through service to others, spiritual reading, prayer, meditation, individual spiritual direction, frequent attendance at Mass, and the frequent reception of the sacraments of reconciliation and Holy Eucharist. In short, it's really prayer and dedication to God. I know not just for persons who experience same-sex attraction, but for all of us, in order to overcome those disordered desires, that's a call to all of us and something that we all need.
Correct, yeah. As you mentioned, in a sense, this could be steps we should all be taking in our own lives. First of all, to be living chaste lives in accord with God's commands. Secondly, in order to live out our lives in accordance with God's commands, to live out our lives the way that God's asked us to, we need that to be supported by prayer, to be supported by the sacraments. It's again, I can only speak from my own experience, but, as a priest, the church requires us to make a retreat every year. The church requires us to pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day. The church doesn't require us, but strongly recommends that we celebrate the Mass every single day. Because again, the sacraments, the prayer, all of these things sustain us in our ministry and sustain us in our daily lives. And that, again, should be the case for every Catholic. Every Catholic needs to be sustained in their daily lives by the sacraments, by prayer, by time with God. And so obviously, in this, we're really just setting a path for that everyone follows or should follow.
I recently heard a retired bishop speaking, and he likened our prayer life to snorkeling versus scuba diving. And, when we pray, it's almost like snorkeling. We can, just go right under the surface and we can see the fish and we can see the beautiful plant life underwater. But to really swim with the fish, to really engage and be a part of that, we have to dive deeper. We have to go scuba diving. And it's that same invitation for all of us, regardless of our virtues, our vices, our inclination, to dive deeper into that relationship with Jesus Christ, to dive deeper into that relationship with the Father and the Spirit, so that we can become more intimately entwined in what is truly good for us as human beings. The third goal for courage is to foster a spirit of fellowship in which all may share thoughts and experiences and so ensure that no one will have to face the challenges of homosexuality alone. Why is that so important?
Again, to speak to what you have already said, this is something that we all need in our faith journeys. When I was in college, I had a men's prayer group that I belonged to, and they were the people who would help me with all my various struggles with sexuality, with whatever it might be, with life in general. They were the people I would go to, I would pray with, I'd be able to share my struggles with. It was so important that when I came to Houston, I joined yet another men's prayer group. And then, I go to seminary and I'm told, oh, you need to join a men's prayer group. I'm like, okay, I'm seeing a common theme here. And all of these various men through the years have become men I'm very close to. Many of them I still have deep and abiding friendships with today. And that's really for all of us. The way that the faith is lived out in communion and in community. If Christ came to found the church for a very specific and real reason. It's because none of us can live out our faith journeys alone. All of us need the assistance and support of both close, intimate friends and a community if we want to live out our faith lives.
And that's really the last two goals, kind of helping to summarize that. It's the idea of support, to be mindful of the truth that chaste friendships are not only possible, but necessary in a chaste Christian life. And the idea of setting a good example, that all of us can live lives that may serve as good examples to others.
Right.
So the goal of EnCourage really kind of encapsulate this idea of we're just calling each other to be the best Catholics we can be, regardless of our inclinations or our vices. Correct,
yeah. And when I think about the importance of community and the support and living this out, someone I'm close to, chastity and all these different pieces, and I just so distinctly remember me talking about how I've been asked by the church to embrace celibacy in my own life, and the response was, "Yeah, but Luke, I don't want to be lonely like you are."
Because all priests are lonely, is the implication.
And I had to laugh because, again, there's this mindset of, if I'm not in a relationship, I'm not going to be fulfilled and I'm going to be lonely. And there is a certain truth to that. But that truth can be countered by a community. And that truth can be countered by having this close group of support and friends. Because otherwise, we are calling them to a life of loneliness. And in a certain sense, that's not fair or just. If we are, in a sense, calling someone to live out celibacy, to live out chastity, then as a community, we have to give them something in return, something that will support them so that they are fulfilled, so they do have friendships, so they do have relationships, so they are able to live their lives in a healthy and holy and happy way.
Now, I do want to bring up something that I know people are going to ask. We keep saying persons who experience same-sex attraction. Why do we say that instead of gay or homosexual? Because even in the church's documents, it's very specific. Persons who experience same-sex attraction. Why do we do that?
Right. So the church does this because the church doesn't want to buy into or accept a reductionist approach to where we reduce someone to only their sexual orientation. To kind of put it in a joking manner, if I was to walk up to you and say, "Hi, I'm Father Luke, I'm a heterosexual," you would probably stare at me kind of weird and say, "Why are you telling me that?" And to take it even further, me telling you that I'm heterosexual tells you very little about who I am or about what I believe or about what's important to me. And yet we've built this mentality and mindset that your sexual orientation is the most important thing someone needs to know. Now, I'm not saying it's not important, but what I am trying to say is that it is not the only thing that we need to know about someone. It is not necessarily even the most important thing about someone, although it obviously is an important part of who they are. And so in this language, the church is really trying to teach us that again, we shouldn't be reducing people to just their basic attractions, that there is more to the human being than just who they are sexually attracted to. To go back to that analogy I used at the beginning, when we encounter them, we need to get to know each other. we can't just stay on a surface level, or as you said, we need to dive deeper into the individual. Only in that can we actually truly get to know the person, can we truly come to be in a relationship with them, and can we actually truly walk that journey of faith together.
Now, what if it's not the individual themselves? I know many of us, you said, you have a friend who experiences same-sex attraction. I know there are Catholics, there are listeners right now who are saying, okay, well, it's not me, but it's my son, it's my daughter, it's my cousin, it's my niece, if it's my whomever it is. What do we do to reach out and support those family members?
Right. So Courage has a parallel ministry called EnCourage. And so whereas Courage is specifically for those who experience same-sex attraction, who come together and meet with the assistance of a chaplain, EnCourage is for the family members and friends of those who experience same-sex attraction, who want to come together to also get that support, to get that guidance, and to figure out how to live out their faith lives in the midst of navigating their relationship with their loved one.
So you've been helpful in bringing the Courage apostolate into the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. If someone is listening saying, well, I have these inclinations, I want to reach out, I want to learn more. If I understand correctly, there are 3 chaplains in the Archdiocese who are trained to be facilitators with this, or I guess who are members of the apostolate, as
Correct.
you said.
Correct.
And if they wanted to reach out and find out more, where can they go? What can they do?
So they could go, first of all, to the Archdiocesan website. If you go to www.archgh.org/courage or archgh.org/encourage, that will bring you to websites for that. On there, you will find the email to contact these apostolates, which is courage@archgh.org or encourage@archgh.org. And at which point you'll be connected with the chaplain so that they can assist you in your faith journey.
And we'll make sure to include all the links and the email addresses in the show notes for this episode. I think it's so key that we're reaching out and offering this in the midst of a culture which really kind of goes to extremes. It's either you have to 100% fully embrace a gay, homosexual, LGBTQ lifestyle and agenda, or you have this other group that says it has to be 100% completely rejected. And the church, in the beauty of Christ's love, offers mercy, acceptance, a home that says, as you stated so clearly, as a child of God, you have dignity. And we as the church need to recognize and embrace you for who you are and how God made you. Doesn't mean that we endorse everything that you do. But as sinners, we don't endorse everything that any of us do. We're always called to something more. We're always called to a level of holiness that goes beyond where we're at currently in our lives. For those who want to do more from the pews, maybe they don't know anyone directly, or they themselves don't experience this, but they want to find a way to reach out and learn more. What can they do?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was thinking about this, Courage and EnCourage is an important ministry and has a very particular place in the church. But as you heard from the goals, those who join the Courage ministry, for example, have already in many ways accepted that call to live out chastity within their lives. Well, many members of the LGBTQI community, many of those who experience same-sex attraction, are not yet at that point. They're still on the faith journey. They're like Augustine, who don't even know that God's calling them or welcoming them. And so the first thing we all have to do is, first, of course, to be praying for these people, to be praying for everyone. We need to be praying for everyone to be able to come to know Christ, to know his love. And we need to then begin to make invitations. We need to invite people to come to church. Rather than being scared of them, to invite them to come in and get to know God and know more about him. Of course, that means we have to check ourselves. We have to check our own fears, our own hesitancies, our own insecurities. But with that, to begin that welcome and love to people, then they can begin that journey of faith, which might lead them to saying, hey, courage is something I want. In the meantime, however, we need to be there to walk that journey of faith with people. And I think that's something that we're all called to do, to walk that journey of faith, to, as Christ did, to sit down at supper with them, to get to know them, to share with them our hopes and dreams, to hear their hopes and dreams. And with that, we start to become a little less scared of them. We start to be a little less scared of their faith journey. We begin to recognize that although our paths are completely different, our struggles might be completely different. In a sense, though, the story is the same. And the same as we saw that these goals are the same goals that all of us should be seeking in our lives. And so with that, we can then begin to, after the invitation of love, to share the truth of the gospel with people. And again, that's the tension we hold together as Catholics, that we always give the truth in love. That if we're only giving love, if you will, with no truth, well, that's an empty compassion. If we only give the truth with no love, well, that's, as Paul says, that's a clashing cymbal. That rather we wed together truth and love. And in doing that, we can begin to share our journey of faith with them. They can begin to walk on a journey of faith as well. And then together, hopefully, we all journey to heaven.
And a thank you to Father Luke Millett for joining us today. If you want to learn more about the Courage or EnCourage apostolates here in the Archdiocese, you can visit archgh.org/courage or archgh.org/encourage for information, resources, and an email address where you can get even more information. And of course, we've included all those links in the show notes for this episode. And as always, if you want to learn more about the ministries and offices of the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston, you can find us online at archgh.org. That's archgh.org. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon, here on Around the Archdiocese.